Get ready for terrifying morgue horror stories. Tales where the silence of death is shattered by the unexplainable. Like in the story you're about to hear, where a simple janitor vanished without a trace after claiming he saw a corpse sit up on the embalming table. But before we begin, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any terrifying stories, and drop a comment telling me which city or country you're watching this from. Some nights weigh heavier than others, not because of the work itself, but because of the silence, the kind of silence that feels like it's listening to you think. That night, the funeral home was empty, just me and Hank. He was the night janitor, quiet, kept to himself, the kind of guy who did his job right and didn't waste words, the kind of person you respect because he knows the power of silence. The reception lights were always turned off after 10. All that was left was that cold, bluish glow from the prep room, giving everything the feel of some old lab. I was finishing up an embalming that had taken way longer than usual. Big guy, must have been 280 pounds, with edema in his neck and a compromised thoracic cavity. Took me nearly twice as long as it should have. Hank had passed by the door a couple of times, bringing rags and disinfectant. Didn't say a word, just gave me a small nod and headed toward the locker room. By that hour, the hallways felt longer, like the light itself was stretching. And the air, it felt thick, too still. I noticed it, but I brushed it off. Probably just exhaustion. After I finished, I went to log the details: name, time of procedure, batch numbers for the chemicals, the kind of routine that demands focus. But then I realized something was off. The deceased's hand, the one I'd carefully positioned over his abdomen, was now dangling at his side, palm down, like it had slipped. Only that didn't make sense. I'd secured his arms with support pins, strong enough to hold. I figured maybe I'd gotten distracted. I repositioned the hand, double-checked the clamps, but I'll admit, a chill ran up my spine. I tried to rationalize it. Vibrations from the instrument cart, a door slamming somewhere, but the whole building was dead quiet. Too quiet. That's when I noticed. Hank hadn't come by in a while, and that wasn't like him. His cleaning routine was clockwork. He'd hit the reception, then the bathroom, then the prep room, disappear into the break room and circle back to the locker room. The whole loop took about 40 minutes, and I'd been there for nearly an hour since I last saw him. I stepped out and called, "Hank." Nothing. No answer. The only sound was the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. I walked to the locker room. The door was cracked open, the light on. Inside, his backpack was shoved in the corner, his phone on the bench charging. His water bottle was still open. Everything looked like he'd stepped out mid-task and never came back. I picked up his phone, hoping for a clue. At the top of the screen there was a voice memo, recorded just minutes ago, sent by him, but not to anyone. Like he'd hit record in a panic. I pressed play, his voice was shaky, breathless. I swear I saw it. The body. That last one. It sat right up on the table. Looked at me. I'm not crazy. It looked at me. The eyes were stitched shut, but it still looked at me. The recording ended with the sound of a door slamming and footsteps running. Nothing else. I sat down on the bench, my stomach twisting. It could have been a prank, a nervous breakdown, anything. But the way he sounded, that was real fear, desperation. And the strangest part? I started remembering something else. When I'd finished the embalming, the deceased's eyes had been stitched shut, like always. Jaw wired shut with metal thread. No way he could have moved. I'd done it myself, passed the needle, tied the knot, sealed everything properly. There was no way the body could have moved, let alone looked at anyone. I made my way back to the prep room, slow. Every step echoed louder than it should have. When I walked in, the body was still there, of course, but the air in the room had changed. It felt colder, and I don't mean the usual chill of the refrigeration. This was different, a cold that seemed to come from inside, like the room itself was holding its breath. I stepped closer to the table, and there it was again. The right hand was out of place, but this time, the whole arm looked like it had shifted, more open, like the body had pushed itself up. no marks on the clamps. And the skin, along the side of his stomach, there was a crease, like he'd been sitting for a while. My first instinct was to back away. Get out. But the technician in me wanted to check the sutures, and that's when I saw the worst part. The wire I'd used to secure the jaw was loose, almost undone, like it had been cut from the inside. But there was no visible cut, just the wire slipping free, as if something had pulled it from within. At that moment, all I could think was that I needed to leave. I didn't scream, didn't run, just walked backward, never taking my eyes off the body. I went to the office and called the manager, told him half the story, said Hank was missing, that something was wrong with the body, that maybe there'd been a security breach, that we needed to check the cameras. But the cameras showed nothing. No sign of Hank entering the room, no sign of him fleeing, no movement from the body. Just a stretch of silence, like that part of the footage had been erased. When the team arrived with the police, they searched everywhere. No trace of Hank, no footprints, no evidence. Nothing. The body was cremated 2 days later, per the family's request. I oversaw the whole process. Not that it helped me sleep any better, but in a way it felt like the right thing to do. I never told anyone about the recording, never turned in the phone. I kept it. Every now and then I listened to it just to remind myself it was real. The trembling voice, the desperation, the absolute certainty of what he saw. It wasn't in his head. I know that because I saw the hands move, felt the energy in that room. And to this day, every time I walk in there, it feels like someone's watching me. I still work at the funeral home. This job isn't for everyone. It takes a certain kind of detachment. But some days, that detachment isn't enough. Some days, the weight of this profession isn't in the bodies. It's in what lingers after they're gone. What's left in the air, in the walls, in the silence. I never talk about Hank. Officially, he disappeared. Unofficially, nobody wants to know. But I remember, every day. And now, every time I step into that room, I look twice at the body on the table. Because now I know, sometimes the dead still have something to say. It's chilling to think someone could just disappear without a trace, especially in a place where death is supposed to rest in peace. But what happens when the dead suddenly seem alive? That's what you'll discover in the next story, where an embalmed body shows signs of breathing. The first thing that struck me about that place was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that settles over a quiet morning. This was heavy, suffocating silence, like the air itself was thicker, denser. The morgue sat on the outskirts of a small rural town, far enough away that no one stumbled upon it by accident. Surrounded by woods and pasture land, it was the kind of building time itself seemed to have forgotten. The concrete walls were stained with damp, and the windows were always fogged up, even in the cold. The front gate creaked every time someone pushed it open. And the wind, it never stopped, whistling through the cracks in the structure. Some nights, you could hear the trees outside swaying, rustling like they were whispering something just beyond understanding. I'd worked there for over 15 years. I'm a forensic pathologist. I've always taken my job seriously, with precision, and I never paid much mind to rumors. I got used to hearing stories from nurses who swore they'd seen shadows, or staff who felt something strange during the night shift. But I never gave it a second thought. I figured it was all in their heads. The human body is a machine. When it stops, it stops. No spirits, no lingering souls, just flesh, bone, gas, rigor mortis. That's it. That night, the body arrived around 9. A man in his 50s found dead in the barn of his own farm. A severe head wound, cranial trauma, a lot of blood around his face. The scene, according to the sheriff's report, looked like an accident, but there were odd details. The door locked from the inside, no signs of a fall. The expression on his face unsettled me. His jaw was locked at an unnatural angle, his eyes slightly open, like he died mid-scream, the sound never escaping his throat. The smell was stronger than usual too. Not decomposition, since the body was still fresh, but a thick metallic odor, like old sweat mixed with congealed blood. It was nauseating. I placed the body in refrigeration unit number 3, as usual. I checked the details, filled out the paperwork, cleaned my tools. Everything was routine. But as I turned to leave, I felt a strange chill run down my neck. One of those deep internal shivers, like someone had pressed an icy finger against my spine. I spun around, convinced someone was behind me. But there was nothing. No sound, just the hum of the fridge and the wind outside, howling through the vents. I thought about mentioning it to Jessica, the tech who sometimes worked the night shift with me, but I figured it would sound ridiculous. I brushed it off, retreated to my corner, and caught some sleep in the break room, like I always did when the shift was quiet. The next morning, around 7, I returned to the storage room to begin the examination. That's when the first unexplained thing happened. When I opened the door to Unit 3, the body was in a different position than I'd left it. There was no way it was a mistake. I always placed the arms extended at the sides, but his arms were crossed over his chest, like he'd been arranged for a funeral. That wasn't protocol. No one touches a body without documentation, without a record. And that night, I was the only one in the building. I checked the logs, reviewed the security footage, but of course, the camera in room 3 had been glitching since the day before. Frozen image, no record. I stood there for a few minutes, staring at the body. You know that feeling when you sense something is off, but you can't put your finger on it. Like something isn't just lying there. It's waiting. It's hard to explain. I took a deep breath, tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd positioned the arms that way and forgotten. Maybe it was cadaveric spasm, some residual muscle movement. Nothing that couldn't be explained. But deep down, something was stirring. Like my body had noticed something my mind was still trying to deny. I returned to my lab, trying to convince myself it was nothing. I turned on the equipment, prepared the slides, opened the instrument cabinet with the same automatic routine. But as I worked, I could still feel the body in the other room. Like there was something in there that refused to stay still. Every time I moved, I thought I heard a faint creak, a dry groan, like the metal of the gurney contracting. I looked twice. Nothing. But that feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. A physical discomfort like a pair of eyes glued to the back of my head. When I finally began the examination, I noticed something else. The man's chest. It was wrong. The skin over his pectoral area looked stretched, slightly swollen, like there was pressure from inside. I placed my hand on it, and for a second I felt something pulse. I jerked back. I cursed under my breath. It had to be a nervous system reflex, trapped gas something. But even as I tried to rationalize it, I knew it wasn't normal. Not like that. The skin was cold, but damp, and the worst part? It was rising and falling. Slowly, almost imperceptibly. But it was moving, like the body was breathing. I froze. I stood there, pinchers hovering in the air, straining to listen. I couldn't hear air moving, but I could hear the sound of tissue shifting, a wet, tense creak from inside. The sound a damp shirt would make if someone wrung it out, slow and deliberate. My stomach twisted. A cold sweat trickled down my back. I took 2 steps back, bumped into the scalpel tray, and sent everything crashing to the floor. The noise was loud enough that for a moment it seemed like something on the gurney reacted. A spasm, a slight twitch of the right leg. I saw it. I swear I did. I cursed again and bolted from the room. The hallway lights started flickering all at once. The AC made a strange noise, like it was sucking air in instead of blowing it out. I tried the emergency exit, but it was locked, not with a key. Locked like something on the other side was pushing it shut. Panic clawed at my chest. This place where I'd spent so much time suddenly felt like a maze. The lights flickered, and the shadows on the walls moved unnaturally. Everything felt off-kilter. When I finally stumbled out, drenched in sweat, I went straight to the neighboring hospital. I told them what I'd seen. I called Jessica and 2 nurses. We went back together. And of course, when we opened the room, everything was normal. The body was in the correct position. The chest was still, no sound, no movement. The security cameras were still glitching. And they all looked at me like I'd lost it. After that day, I started avoiding the night shift. But the truth is, I wasn't the only one who noticed strange things. Jessica mentioned, days later, that she'd heard a voice whisper her name when she entered the refrigeration unit. An intern swore he saw a shadow dart behind the curtain, even though he was alone. One of the security guards said he heard the autopsy room door slam 3 times in the middle of the night, always at 3:33 a.m. None of it made it into the reports, of course. No one wanted to seem crazy. People tried to explain it rationally. Post-mortem spasms, expanding gases, faulty wiring. It all made sense until you were in there alone, feeling that weight in the air, like the building was breathing with you. Or worse, for you. I started spending less and less time there. Eventually, I stuck to reviewing old reports, far from the cold storage. But even then, sometimes in the middle of the night when I was home alone, I'd hear that sound again. The wet creak, the slow rustle of fabric, like someone was lying nearby, struggling to draw breath. I never knew if it was my mind playing tricks, or if something from that morgue had decided to follow me home. The morgue is still operating today, but it has a reputation. No one likes working there for long, and those who pass by say the air smells different, heavy, old, like every wall has trapped the final breath of someone who left, but never really went away. Creepy, right? Watching a corpse breathe is something that defies any rational explanation, and just imagining it gives you chills. But sometimes the supernatural doesn't come with noises or movements. It comes from a simple reflection, like in the story you're about to hear, where a mirror revealed something that didn't belong to our world. The first time I stepped into that chapel, the silence felt heavier than usual. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was as if the air itself had frozen. The dark wood of the pews, the scent of extinguished candles, the lone portrait resting on the casket. Everything carried a weight, like the place held more than just memories. That night, a family had come to say goodbye to a man named Albert. A quiet wake. Just the widow, a younger son, and an elderly aunt and uncle. No flowers, no music, no speeches. The kind of silent ceremony that speaks louder in what's left unsaid. While the family stood inside, motionless in absolute silence for nearly an hour, I stayed outside, giving them their time. I've worked there for years, preparing the bodies, setting up the rooms, and sometimes, like that night, locking up after the goodbyes. Nothing about that evening was routine. And trust me, I've seen my share of strange things. People swearing they heard voices from the casket, candles snuffing out on their own in sealed rooms, even shadows moving behind the morgue glass. But there was always a logical explanation, or at least that's what I told myself. After the family left, I went inside to turn off the lights and do a quick cleanup, like always. Albert's photo was still there on the wooden easel, his serious gaze suggesting a man who'd faced more than his share of hardship. The frame was old, slightly crooked, but there was something in his expression that held my attention. It wasn't sadness or peace. It was presence, like he was still there, watching. I began turning off the lights one by one, starting with the stained glass windows along the sides. The chapel's old Gothic architecture made every sound echo. Every footstep, every draft felt like a whisper. Even alone, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. It wasn't paranoia. It was like someone else was there. But my eyes saw nothing. Then I passed the mirror, an antique thing hanging near the side entrance with an iron frame and glass clouded by time. I'd never paid it much mind. It had been there since I started. But that night, something made me look, and what I saw stopped me cold. In the reflection, the chapel's nave and the closed casket were clear. But there was something else. A man standing between the pews and the casket, his back to me, dressed in a dark classic suit, hands clasped behind him, staring at the empty space where the family had been. He didn't move, didn't breathe. He just stood there, motionless. I spun around on instinct. The chapel was empty. Everyone was gone. I looked back at the mirror. The man was still there, standing, unmoving, as if he only existed inside that old glass. I stood frozen, trying to make sense of it. I inched closer, almost not wanting to, but unable to look away. The closer I got, the more details emerged. The cut of his suit was from another era, 1950s or 60s. His shoes gleamed, even without direct light, and his posture. It wasn't grief. It was vigilance. Like he was there to ensure something, or to say goodbye to someone. The energy in the room shifted. The air grew colder, though the AC wasn't on. And for a second I felt something I never had there before. Respect. Fear, too, sure. But it was like I was witnessing something not meant for the living. A silent spiritual presence that didn't want to harm, just to be. A final farewell, maybe. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. When I opened them, the mirror was empty. Just my pale, cold-sweating reflection. I didn't tell anyone that night. I locked up as usual, turned off the lights, and left without glancing back at the glass. But it stayed with me. The next morning, the widow returned early. She wanted to talk, her eyes restless like she still needed to settle something. And that's when things got even stranger. She arrived before the doors even opened. Dark circles under her eyes, hair hastily tied back, an old coat draped over her shoulders despite the morning sun. She walked slowly into the reception, clutching a small purse to her chest. She asked if she could go back into the chapel, just for a minute. I said, of course, that the space wasn't set up for another service yet. I walked with her, noticing how she scanned the room like she was searching for something, or someone. Inside, the scent of old wood and yesterday's incense still lingered. Albert's portrait was gone, but his presence seemed to remain. She walked to where the casket had been and stood there, silent. I just watched. After a while, she turned to me. There was something in her expression that put me on edge. Not fear, but a need to confirm something. She asked if anyone had come back to the chapel after the family left the night before. I said yes, that I'd gone in to clean, like I always do. She nodded, but that wasn't what she wanted to know. She asked me directly if I'd seen anyone. A man. The way she said it sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't a guess. She knew what she was asking. I hesitated. It all felt surreal, but something told me not to lie. I said yes. That for a moment I'd seen a man in a dark suit in the mirror by the side entrance, but when I turned, no one was there. I expected her to call me crazy, to ask if I was tired or stressed. But she didn't. She just opened her purse with trembling hands and pulled out a black and white photo, yellowed at the edges. "Was this the man?" she asked. I didn't even need to take the photo. One look was enough. It was him. Same stance, same suit, even the same haircut. The difference was that in the photo, he stared straight at the camera. His gaze intense, full of presence. You could almost feel the energy through the paper. I nodded, swallowing hard. She took a deep breath and sat down on one of the pews. We were silent for a moment before she began to speak, her voice low, like she was sharing a secret that shouldn't leave the room. She told me the man in the photo was Albert's father, a stern, unyielding man who never tolerated weakness. He'd died over 20 years ago, but she'd always felt like he lingered, not maliciously, but like a shadow that never quite left. They fought before he died, she said. They never made up. She thought maybe he'd come, not for her, but for his son, to say goodbye, or maybe to forgive. We didn't know. But that presence didn't feel like anything from the living world, and it didn't feel wrong, just necessary. Her words stuck with me, not because I wasn't used to strange things in that place, but because there was a quiet truth in what she said. Like it all made sense. Like for a moment, I'd witnessed something beyond logic, a goodbye that couldn't happen in life, manifesting in the only way it could in a place where life and death meet. After she left, I sat alone in the chapel for a while. The mirror was still there, hanging on the same wall, reflecting nothing. But now, it felt like more than an object. It was a boundary, crossing point, and I couldn't look at it the same way anymore. I never mentioned it to the staff, not to the priest, not to the other employees. I just kept doing my job, cleaning, organizing, preparing wakes. But every time I passed that mirror, I looked away. Not out of fear exactly, out of respect, because I knew that sometimes the dead have things to say, And some goodbyes aren't just for the living. Since that night, I've noticed little things. A breeze where there shouldn't be one. The sound of soft footsteps on the wooden floor when the room is empty. The faint feeling of being watched in the final minutes of my shift. Nothing aggressive. Nothing that feels like it wants to scare. Just signs. Little reminders that the building holds more than bodies and memories. A supernatural experience doesn't have to be violent to leave a mark. Sometimes it's subtle, almost poetic. And that's what makes it even more unsettling. The calm way the impossible presents itself. Now, when people ask if I've seen anything strange there, I usually smile and change the subject. Not because I don't want to talk, but because some stories only make sense when you live them. The man in the mirror, the widow searching for answers, the father who maybe just wanted one last look at his son. It's all become part of the place. Part of me too. And if you ever find yourself in an empty chapel and feel like you're not entirely alone, don't panic. Maybe someone's just there to say goodbye, and you've been given the privilege of witnessing it. Terrifying. The reflection in the mirror showed that some farewells can come from beyond. But the dead don't always manifest through images. Sometimes it's their sorrow that echoes in the silence. Like in the next story, where unexplained crying interrupted a body preparation. But before we continue, if you've made it this far, it means you're enjoying these stories. So hit the like button to let YouTube know you love this kind of content and don't want to miss any more horror stories. The most constant sound in that room is the hum of the arterial pump. When it kicks on, you feel the floor vibrate slightly under your feet, like the concrete has its own pulse. There's also the gurgle of fluids moving through the tubes, the clink of cannulas locking into place, the scrape of metal against the stainless steel sink. It's a technical space, precise, and in its own way, almost peaceful, so long as you know what you're doing. That morning, the body on my table belonged to a man in his early 40s. Overdose. Heroin, according to the file. No visible trauma. His face was calm, almost serene. The kind of look that, with a little care, could allow for an open casket funeral. His mother had requested that specifically. She said she wanted to see her son at peace. So I took my time with the preparation. Those kinds of requests get to you. Even after years of working with the dead, some families stick with you. And mothers, especially, have that power. I was already at the stage of injecting the preservatives. The veins were easy to access, which made everything simpler. Insert the cannula, monitor the pressure, watch the skin tone to make sure the fluid was spreading like it should. Everything was going as planned, until I heard a sound, soft but clear, a sniffle, like someone trying to stifle a cry. Not a scream, not a wail, a sniffle. The kind you try to hide when you don't want anyone to know you're crying. I froze. My eyes locked on the dead man's face, the cannula still pumping, and that sound, it came again. Fainter maybe, or softer, like whoever was making it didn't want to be heard, like they were ashamed or afraid. The first thing that crossed my mind was an air leak. Sometimes during drainage, the body releases gas. It's normal, loud but explainable. But that sound, it wasn't that. It was human, heavy with emotion. It sounded alive. I took a deep breath, rolled my shoulders, cracked my neck, trying to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks. It happens, especially when you're working alone in a cold room, surrounded by silence, with the smell of formaldehyde and hospital-grade cleaner in the air. Sometimes, even the drip of the fluids can mess with your head. But still, I turned off the pump for a second, just to be sure. The silence that followed was so absolute it hurt, and that's when I felt it. The feeling, that thing with no technical name, that negative energy that sometimes lingers when something isn't right. A spiritual presence, invisible but thick, like the air had turned to syrup. It wasn't exactly fear. It was more the sense of being watched. Like in that exact moment, I wasn't the only conscious being in the room. I looked around, but nothing was out of place. No fallen instruments, no strange reflections. Just the body, still, and me trying to keep it together. I got back to work, turned the pump back on, finished suturing the incision, prepped the face for closing. But every time I lowered my head, I felt like someone was standing right behind me. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to see everything I was doing. Like someone was watching the process, maybe even judging it. And the strangest part? That feeling was coming from the direction of the body. Like that man, dead, inert, was somehow aware of everything. Not in a physical sense, but like a supernatural experience, a grief that still pulsed. I've seen things in this morgue that science can't quite explain. Nothing dramatic, no corpses sitting up on the table, but small, strange happenings. Doors creaking on their own, even when locked. Noises that seem intentional. Temperatures dropping suddenly in a sealed room. Things like that. But that sniffle, that was different. It felt personal. I finished the embalming, dressed him in the suit his family had sent, did the makeup with minimal corrections. His face already had a serene expression, and at the end, just before closing the casket temporarily to move him to the viewing room, I noticed something. His eyes were properly stitched, just as they should be. His jaw wired shut with the internal suture. But the corners of his lips, they looked a little damp, like there had been tears. I know it's impossible. I know how fluids work, but I saw it, and it sent a chill up my spine from the base of my neck to the top of my head. During the viewing, I stayed nearby. It's not my role, but sometimes I like to observe, not out of morbid curiosity, but to make sure the family gets whatever small measure of peace I can provide. His mother approached the casket. She touched his chest gently, then slid her hand up to his face, and she said something softly, but I heard it. She said, "I know you were hurting, my son. Now it's all okay." In that moment, I knew she felt it too. Maybe not the same way I did. Maybe she didn't hear the sniffle. But she felt the weight of that unresolved grief, the pain that still hung in the air. This wasn't just sadness. It was connection. A bond that not even death could sever. And that's when it hit me. Sometimes grief doesn't just belong to the living. Some pains are so deep, so rooted, that they keep leaking into the physical world even after the body stops. Kind of echo, a trace, like the suffering needs to be acknowledged before it can finally fade away. After everyone said their goodbyes and the room emptied, I went back to close the casket and move it to the transport area. As I approached, I noticed the light in the room flickered for a second. A quick blink. Normally, I would have ignored it. But in that context, it felt like a final breath. A sign. I lowered the lid slowly, closed it carefully. Before I latched it, I looked at him one last time, his expression still serene, but now lighter. Like, in some way, that man had finally been heard. I don't have a technical explanation for it, and maybe I don't need one. What happened there wasn't some horror movie jump scare. There was no screaming, no blood. But it was real. Intense, a different kind of terror, the kind that comes from the idea that even after death certain pains stay alive, and sometimes they manifest in ways we don't know how to interpret, like a sniffle from the void, a silent plea, a quiet presence, impossible to ignore. After that day, every time I hear an unusual sound in the embalming room, I pause for a second. I listen closely, and above all, I respect it. Because I've learned that some silences speak, and some dead, even in their stillness, still have something to say. Creepy, right? What did you think of the story? From 0 to 10, what rating would you give it? Share your thoughts in the comments. I was just finishing up the paperwork on a traffic accident case when I heard the first sound. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like crying, quick, muffled. The kind of noise your brain tries to explain away instantly. I figured it was the AC unit. It sometimes made weird clicks when the compressor shut off. But no, this was different. It sounded human, and worse. It was coming from inside the cold storage. That night I was alone on the night shift, like usual. The graveyard shift at the San Vicente Forensic Unit, was never a popular gig. Only those who'd been there understood the kind of energy that place carried. It wasn't just the smell of formaldehyde or the flickering lights. It was the air. The air in there was thick, too quiet. Like even time hesitated to pass through that place. The building itself was old. Narrow hallways, worn floors, walls stained with dampness. Everything lit by those fluorescent bulbs that buzzed when they heated up. But the cold storage room where the bodies were kept was the worst part. The walls were grimy white tiles. The ceiling was low. And when you stepped inside, the cold wasn't just physical. It seeped into your skin and clung to your bones. I'd been a coroner for nearly 20 years. I'd seen it all: burned victims, mutilated bodies, horrific accidents. Nothing shocked me anymore. Or so I thought. The crying came back, louder this time. I dropped my pen and turned my head, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. It was high-pitched, like a woman sobbing quietly. But there was no one else there. Just me. And the dead. And the dead don't cry. I stood up slowly, trying to brush it off. I pressed my ear against the door, silence. But the second I turned away, I heard it again. And that's when I got the chills. The kind that starts at the back of your neck and slithers down your spine. That gut feeling telling you something's wrong, even if you can't put your finger on it. Must be the pipes, I thought. Some old valve leaking. I grabbed my flashlight and decided to do a quick sweep of the area, just to make sure everything was fine. The hallway leading to the cold storage always felt longer at night. The sound of my own footsteps echoed off the walls. I passed the prep room where the steel tables and instruments were kept. Everything was in order. But the crying, now it was coming from up ahead, from the refrigeration chamber. When I pushed the door open, I immediately felt the temperature drop, way colder than usual. Like someone had cranked the thermostat to its lowest setting. And inside, the sound stopped. Just like that. Dead silence. The metal lockers were all closed. I walked between them, shining my flashlight on the nameplates and codes. No signs of movement. But the air felt off. It wasn't just cold, it was heavy. I could feel the pressure in my ears, like the air itself was pushing me back. And then came that feeling, the one you try to ignore, the feeling of being watched. I stood there for a few seconds, waiting, trying to make sense of what was happening, and then the light at the far end started flickering. Just that one. And that's when I saw it. Locker number 17 was slightly ajar. I approached cautiously. Every step felt like walking on glass. When I got closer, I saw the door wasn't just poorly shut. There was a dark stain seeping from the edge. Blood. But that body, it had already been autopsied and prepped. There was no way it could still bleed. I took a deep breath and slowly pulled the door open. Inside, lying on her side, her face turned toward me, was the woman. Her name was Isabella Carter. Young, mid-20s. She died under strange circumstances. Found in a motel room, signs of violence but no external injuries. The initial report called it an overdose. But something didn't add up. Her face was frozen in an expression of sheer terror. Jaw locked, eyes wide open, like she'd seen something unspeakable before she died. And there she was, with that same expression. Only now, her eyes were open and they were staring right at me. I stumbled back. The flashlight shook in my hand. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my throat. And then, with her eyes locked on mine, her mouth moved. Not fully, just a slight twitch. But I saw it. I swear I saw it. I took 2 more steps back, tripped over my own feet, and crashed into another locker. The light flickered again. This time every bulb in the room started flashing in sequence. A loud crack echoed from the ceiling, and the crying. It came back. But now it wasn't coming from one direction. It was everywhere, like the walls themselves were weeping. I froze, literally. The temperature plummeted so fast my breath turned to vapor. And then, in the reflection of one of the lockers, I saw a shadow. Tall, still, standing right behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing. just the empty hallway and the sound of my own panic. The crying grew louder, now mixed with whispers. Incomprehensible phrases like someone murmuring in another language. And the whole time, that feeling of something lurking just behind me, almost close enough to touch. I didn't think twice. I ran. I bolted down the hall, slipping on the icy floor, slamming into the walls. I passed the prep room where the instruments rattled on the counter. I made it to the main office and locked the door behind me. Leaning against the wall, my hands shaking, I tried to catch my breath, but the air wouldn't come. I stood there for what felt like forever. Could have been a minute, could have been half an hour. All I know is that once the silence returned, the cold vanished with it, like nothing had happened, like it was all in my head. The next morning I turned in my badge, didn't say a word, just told them I wasn't feeling well and needed some time off. I never set foot in that morgue again, and I was never the same. To this day, I wake up sweating, the sound of that crying echoing in my ears. Sometimes I feel that same cold, even on the hottest days. And on some nights, when everything is too quiet, I'm certain I'm still there, trapped in that icy hallway, with her watching me. They say there's a story behind Isabella's death, that she was the victim of some kind of ritual, that her body was left there on purpose, and that her soul never rested. Some claim she's seeking justice. Others say she just wants company. The new night shift tech who took over? He quit 2 weeks later. Said he heard someone knocking on the cold storage door. 3 knocks, always at the same time. No alarms went off, no cameras caught anything, but he swore that when he went to check, locker number 17 was slightly ajar. These stories prove that even in places where science rules, there are secrets no one can explain. If you've made it this far with me, leave the phrase "crying in the morgue" in the comments, just so I know you made it to the end. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can keep listening to stories like these, because there's always something new coming. Oh, and don't skip the like. It's what shows me it's worth bringing more stories like this. There's a video right here with more morgue horror stories. Click it and keep going with me there.